Mei Chu is the Google Certified Trainer Program owner, and she's the one that's diligently monitoring all of the posts that are made in the Google Trainer group, and working really hard in the background to support the thousands of trainers worldwide. And she's the one that made this session possible. So we thank her for that. And she also wanted to pass a message along to everybody. She says that she's constantly inspired by the work that you're doing, especially during these unique times. So really enjoys her role in supporting the trainer program. She's done a lot of great things. I think you can all agree that her engagement and in the trainer group has been awesome. So by way of additional introductions, today leading your sessions are myself. I'm Quinn Henderson, and you'll be hearing from her later is Diane Rutherford. I want to give you a little bit of background about each of us so you know who you're listening to today. I'm an education lead with Future Design School. I'm also a Google certified trainer, like all of you. I'm also a Google certified innovator. And before joining the Future Design School team, I served as the technology coordinator for a public school district in Utah, where I currently still live. And I spent most of my time in that role coaching teachers and district leaders on the effective use and integration of technology in the classroom. So something I absolutely love doing. And then joining me today is Diane. She's also an education lead at Future Design School. And before joining the team a couple of years ago, she taught sixth grade for about 5 years in Ontario. And it was after facilitating the Young Innovator Program by Future Design School with a group of students, and then also completing her own innovation leadership certification, that Diane knew that Future Design School was where she wanted to be. So she left the classroom and joined the team, and she is a valuable part of our team. You'll hear from her coming up in just a moment. So we're very excited to welcome you, and this is a two-part Trainer PD series. The first session, which of course is happening right now, focuses on the remote pedagogical practices with G Suite tools. And then our next session coming up in about a week will be focused around remote assessment practices with G Suite tools. So as you likely saw in an email that I sent out late last week, that we've created a Google site and resource hub, which is active now. And as we move through the next two sessions, you'll notice that there are going to be new pages being added, and Diane's dropped a link to that in the chat. And we're going to direct you to certain pages throughout each session. And the hub is meant to be your resource throughout the sessions, and then also a resource for you to refer back to so that you can leverage any of the work that you've done throughout these two sessions, and then also use it to continue to support all of those educators that you are working with. So there are a couple of goals and objectives that we've set for these next couple of sessions. And the first is providing you with a hands-on experience with Google tools to support best practices for remote learning. So not only do we get to talk about remote pedagogical practices, but think about those tools. And so hopefully you'll pick up some tricks that you'll be able to use today with other teachers. And then we also want to provide you with inspiration for leveraging Google tools to enhance teaching and assessment practices in a remote setting. We also want to develop strategies to help you train others on leveraging G Suite tools for teaching, learning, and assessment. And of course, we want you to be able to use this as an opportunity to build connections with your peers. And you're going to have opportunities to collaborate and brainstorm with them here throughout this session as well as the next session. And we've seen a lot of great things and ideas be shared. And a lot of people staying in touch to follow up and work together on ideas. So hopefully you take advantage of that. And finally, we know that you all know this, but meaningful change in education takes way more than technology. And through these PD sessions, we're going to look at how the G Suite tools support the pedagogical approach to driving exceptional learning and assessment practices in a remote setting. So now that we've taken care of a lot of the logistics, we've outlined our goals and objectives, I'm going to hand it over to Diane, and she'll share a little bit more about who we are at Future Design School and what we do, and set the stage for exceptional remote learning. Diane?
Thank you. So as Quinn mentioned, we just wanted to take a moment right now and share a little bit about who we are at Future Design School. And at Future Design School, we are a team made up of educators, entrepreneurs, and designers who are all passionate about transforming education. And together, our ultimate goal is to empower teachers to develop future-ready students. When we think of future-ready students, we are looking at the student holistically. Our goal is the conscious development of future-ready skills and competencies, which you can see in the outer purple ring. So things like collaboration, communication, equity and inclusion, entrepreneurship. However, we're also looking at character development, acquisition of learning skills, and social and emotional learning. In the orange ring in the center, we are focusing in on well-being and thinking about how to foster the development of a sense of identity, optimism, and have students feel psychologically safe. This ring, as we know, is especially important in a remote setting, as well-being is truly in service of great learning taking place. And we support schools at Future Design School through professional development, comprehensive curriculum, and strategic support, as well as direct-to-student programs. And we have done a lot of work with schools, districts, and also large companies like Google. So this gives us great insight into industries and the future of work and allows us to bring that information back into schools to foster the development of this future-ready skill set that's going to set students up for success in the future. So we want to dig into our first session on remote pedagogical practices with G Suite tools. However, before we begin talking about the tools, we want to set a bit of context. As we adapt to this brave new world of physical distancing and remote learning, statistics show that at last count, over 91% of the world's students have been affected by school closures. So this equates to approximately 1.57 billion learners in over 190 countries that are currently out of school. While we know this number sounds daunting, as educators, we still have a responsibility to provide continuity of learning for our students. And yes, this feels like a major challenge that we are facing, but it is also an amazing opportunity. And this new paradigm that we are living in has the potential to reshape the future of learning. And leveraging technology like G Suite tools in meaningful ways is going to help support us in that mission. So before we dig into the pedagogy, let's just take a moment and talk about virtual learning spaces, as we're sure that you've spent a lot of time in these last few weeks helping educators get their virtual learning spaces set up. So when we think about setting up that virtual classroom or that virtual learning space, there's a couple of key components that we want to keep in mind and things that I'm sure that you've already considered. And those include having a central resource hub, enabling two-way communication, consideration of content delivery, and having a support strategy in mind. And we know, of course, that the G Suite tools allow for a really smooth transition of setting up these classrooms virtually. So we're going to unpack these a little bit more in detail. Now teachers have a deeper need to create resource hubs, not only for their students, but also for the parents. So leveraging tools like Google Classroom or Google Sites and Google Groups are really great options to use for that central hub where everything is housed in one place. And with G Suite tools, educators, parents, and students are able to stay connected in many different ways, both synchronously and asynchronously. Educators may want to consider setting up appointment slots where students or parents can book them for meetings, and this helps manage that timetable as well throughout the day. And of course, with remote learning, we know it's a fine balance between synchronous and asynchronous learning, and especially when we're thinking about some of the rules imposed by districts where synchronous learning is not allowed. We do know that students do benefit from that face time with their teachers and peers. However, we also know that the use of videos to deliver instructions or concepts or content is really powerful in supporting students at learning at their own pace. And finally, as you are already aware, educators are looking for a support network to help with this transition to remote learning, to help mitigate any strategies and challenges that they come across. So as trainers, your peers and leaders and community are relying on you now more than ever. And we know that you are in high demand for your expertise and are working tirelessly to effectively support all stakeholders in this time and empower them to feel confident in their transition to remote learning. So also parents need to know how they can support their children at home during this time. And so having teachers set up Google Groups or sites or Hangouts with the parent community will also help them feel supported in this transition. We know that these components are essential in setting up a virtual classroom. However, we also want to think about the student learning experiences that are happening in those remote settings. So in a moment, we are going to move into a collaborative brainstorm. And to do that, we are going to get you set up on your site for your cohort, and I'll pass it back to Quinn.
All right. Thanks, Diane. So we're getting to that point where we're going to start to think about the technology. But before we even do that, we want to focus on the pedagogy and consider what makes for exceptional learning. And as Diane mentioned, we're going to have you participate in a collaborative brainstorm in a moment. But before we tell you how to access your collaborative docs, we want to cover the questions and share the questions that you're going to brainstorm around. The very first question we want you to consider and think about is what makes for an exceptional learning experience? And you can think about this in a very general sense. Even what made for exceptional learning while you were in the classroom, really what made those moments great. And you might also think about your learning experiences as a learner and what made those great. And you want to write down everything that comes to mind in regard to all of those elements that make for exceptional learning. So that's the first. The second we want you to consider and think about are what are the barriers to exceptional learning in a remote setting? Right? List all of those that come to mind that you can think of. And remember, of course, this is a brainstorm, so there are no wrong answers. And so list all of those within your groups. Those are the two things we want you to consider when you move into your brainstorm, and that'll be listed on your doc. What makes for exceptional learning, and then what are the barriers for remote learning, creating exceptional learning. So here is how you're going to set up your groups and do some collaboration. So we're going to drop the link again into the chat for the resource hub. It's also on your screen there if you want to type it in. When you get to the resource hub, you're going to see that there's a new page activated titled Remote Learning, and that link is going to be up at the top right. And when you click on that link, that's going to take you to the Remote Learning page where you'll find the Group Assignments button, and that's going to open up that Group Assignments document. So once you have that Group Assignments document open, what you're going to do is just enter your name in any of the fields with any of the groups. So we'll self-assign ourselves some groups. If you start typing your name in one of the fields and somebody else is typing there, just start putting your name in another one. So first, thinking about what makes for an exceptional teaching and learning experience, some of the things that really stood out were personal choice, giving students choice, that what we're talking about has relevance and purpose. Some people even said real world connections and authentic. Those were other words that were really along those lines. Also, engagement, right? Keeping students engaged is really important to create an exceptional learning experience. Flexibility, relationships, that's a very important piece. Interest in the topic. Yeah, if students aren't interested, then they're probably not going to have a great experience. So getting them interested is key. Some kind of emotional connection, clear communication and expectations, collaboration, rigor, are just a few of the things that you came up with. And there's a lot more in there. We could probably go through each of these. Fun or positive classroom environment, still a really important piece. And then some of the barriers that stood out to us that were similar among all of the groups. Connectivity, number one, that access and being able to have students connect. Another person to put in that, not knowing who's home with the students or if the parents are working from home. It's a whole different environment. So that is definitely a barrier. Student motivation is definitely different, something that is a bit challenging to do remotely. Access to the teacher is definitely a barrier. They're not right there in the room. So having that access and teaching students how to have access to their teacher is a new challenge. The lack of technology, the lack of support, lack of training, lack of motivation, the varying technology skill level of participants. I think that's a really interesting one because that could mean not only the students, but the teachers. So a lot of the experiences that we've had tell us that there is a big gap in the skill level of the teachers in being able to switch gears into a remote learning setting. So that definitely opens up a big opportunity for trainers. And students feel disconnected, definitely. Lack of go-to person when dealing with new knowledge areas. And then even district policy and school policy around live video chats or the tools that you can use. So definitely a barrier in this particular time. So a lot of great ideas coming in on what makes for exceptional learning, and then really those barriers that are standing in our way of delivering that exceptional learning right now. And what you'll see is that many of the tenets and the ideas that you came up with for exceptional learning overlap with our key elements of exceptional learning that we've come up with at Future Design School. And while we'd love to take the time and cover each one of these, the reality is we only have an hour, of course, less than an hour now in today's session. So in this particular case, less is definitely more. So we also want to keep that in mind when we're working with teachers. The reality is that this situation is wholly new to so many. So starting with less for our teachers when we're training them, and then continuing to layer on will definitely help them feel supported in this moment and less overwhelmed. So for these sessions, we'll dig into a few of these tenets and then think about how the G Suite tools can support educators in overcoming the barriers and some of the barriers that we had to exceptional learning in a remote setting. And the ones that are really important in a remote setting include thinking about problem-driven learning, student choice and voice, and ongoing assessment. And as in the next session, we're going to focus solely on assessment. So we're going to park that one for the time being. Now we're just going to focus on problem-driven learning and student choice and voice today. So keep in mind too that the work you just did in the resource hub with those collaboration documents are going to remain there, and your access will remain. So you can always go back and refer to those at any point throughout the sessions and into the future. So let's look at problem-driven learning. Right? Problem-driven learning refers to when the topic and guiding question really reflect authentic issues and challenges that concern or interest students. And a lot of you called that out for what makes exceptional learning in the brainstorm, that it was authentic and real-world based. So that problem could come from a student's own interest and passions, or it's something that could be chosen based on the content standards or curriculum expectations. So let's look at an example. So when we're thinking about problem-driven learning, the topic or challenge could be one of those, like I mentioned, that comes from your curriculum expectation or standards. And let's say you're teaching something about biodiversity. And really the problem that you want students to investigate is how humans have negatively impacted biodiversity. So, or you might wish to have students choose a real world problem that is impacting them or of interest to them. So in this particular time, there are a lot of timely problems that the students could choose from that interest them. And that could be something like food supply chain. That's a real world problem that's a concern right now. Time management, like some of you called out as far as barriers in exceptional remote learning. Access to PPE are just a few of the real world problems that students might be able to dig into to help create problem-driven learning experiences. So problem-driven learning experiences of those real world authentic learning opportunities. And when we look at student choice and voice, the goal is to empower students to bring in their own personal experiences and expertise when creating solutions. So in addition, that means they have the opportunity to choose the topics that they wish to study and really the form that their product takes and what they create. And this is where leveraging the G Suite tools really provides the students an opportunity to shine with ample options to demonstrate their learning and their understanding. So when we think about student choice and voice, we always like to consider starting with the 5 W's and the 1 H, of course. And first of all, we want to think about with whom students want to share their work with. That can help really give an opportunity for some deeper learning if they know who their audience is. And then what are their interests? And for this, one of the things that we like to do is create a wonder wall. And students simply take a pad of sticky notes and write something that they wonder about on the sticky note and put it on the wall. And they can keep doing that for one wonder per sticky note. And then they have a moment to step back and look at it and see what really draws them in and see what they want to maybe start investigating and pursuing. And then next, we think about where do they learn best? So you might want to consider how learning could be extended beyond the 4 walls. And that used to mean beyond the 4 walls of your classroom, but now it really means how can it extend beyond the 4 walls of their home? And I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I'll be interested to see what some of you might come up with when we do a little more brainstorming later. And then we think about when. That encapsulates that flexibility component that some of you mentioned or alluded to in some of the barriers. And that's the flexibility in the students' work schedules and timelines. And then next is the why, and that brings the purpose into their learning. And that again can connect back to that problem-driven tenet of exceptional learning. So that's a really important piece. And then finally, our 1H. How do students want to share their learning with others? And when we take all of that into consideration, that means, or any of those components, we're giving students a great opportunity to flex their student choice and voice. So with the problem-driven learning and the student choice and voice in mind, we can now start to think about the role of all those G Suite tools play in exceptional remote learning. And I'm going to hand it to Diane as we start to explore that.
Awesome, thank you. So with those tenets in mind, we really want to consider the ways in which G Suite tools can be leveraged to create those problem-driven learning opportunities that provide elements of student choice and voice. But before we can think about the tools, we need to think about the educators that we are working with, as they are ultimately our users. We know that educators we work with are on a spectrum in terms of their level of comfort and proficiency in using G Suite tools. So you may have a group of educators that you work with who, like you, are early adopters and are highly experienced in their use of tech tools. So that would be on the left side of the diagram, the early adopters there. And then you have what we call our laggards. So this refers to teachers who are either stuck in their ways or maybe hesitant to adopt new practices. And then anyone that falls in the middle of these two groups is what we tend to call our mushy middle. So regardless of where they fall on this curve, we want to ensure that when training educators, we are meeting them where they are at. And at Future Design School, we have deep expertise in leveraging user-centered design. And our approach is always to be thinking about each of our users and what they are doing, saying, thinking, and feeling in terms of their challenge. And in this case, we want to think of that in terms of leveraging G Suite tools in a remote setting. So this will help us in identifying strategies for how we can better help them in training. To help identify your different user groups or the groups of educators that you are working with, we've created some sample personas that may help you identify their strengths, experiences, and unmet needs. For example, your early adopter educators are likely hungry to learn the newest technologies and believe that G Suite tools have made learning so much more accessible to their students. Or you may be thinking about your mushy middle educators. So they may be keen to be more innovative in their teaching practice, but perhaps they feel that they don't have the time to dig in deeply to using the tools. Finally, if we think about our laggards, they might be educators who are feeling overwhelmed with remote learning. They may just be generally uncomfortable using technology, and they may be resistant to change. So this is a really good exercise in building empathy for the educators that you work with. And you may want to talk directly to them or just ask them these questions and think about putting yourself in their shoes to get a better understanding of their experience in this moment. So let's think about the educators that you work with and consider what are their unmet needs. This is where you're going to add the greatest value in your role as trainers. So to help uncover that, you may wish to use this fill in the blank template. We often call it as a needs statement. And this is going to fill in the blanks with who is your user, what is their unmet need, and what is the insight that comes from that. Sometimes we reframe this as who needs what, because why. Often that why piece, that insight, comes from how your users are currently feeling. And we know, of course, in this moment, they're feeling a range of emotions and a range of skill level in terms of using these tools. So, for example, your need statement might be, teachers need experiences in leveraging technology because they need to see how it is applicable and will add value to their course. So through this, we can see that we can support our teachers in making those deep connections between pedagogy and tech tools. So therefore, the next question that we want to dig into is, in what ways can G Suite tools be leveraged to create problem-driven learning opportunities that provide elements of student choice and voice? So to help answer this question, we're going to invite you to go back into your resource hub and click on that group assignments page again. So you can use that bit.ly if it's not already open. At the bottom of your group list, so you're going to stay in the same group as that first activity, you're going to click on the link for activity 2. In this new brainstorming document, you are going to think about all the ways that the G Suite tools can create opportunities or support problem-driven learning, and how the different tools can be used to support student choice and voice. So in terms of problem-driven, some of the ideas that you came up with were using docs for choice boards, using email to connect with real users, and also to promote that authentic communication, great life skill for students to develop. Using Jamboard to creatively or collaboratively brainstorm real challenges, and thinking of how you could bucket those into groups to support other students and really scaffold that brainstorming process. Using Sheets for comparison of data, using Meet for lots of different things, including video conferencing with experts in the field. You may also want to use Calendar for project check-ins. Again, that project management and time management piece, another really, really effective life skill for students. And then in terms of student choice and voice, we've got a couple here. One is using slides for choose your own adventure stories or to create self-paced learning modules. Using Meet, again, for those live performances. So thinking about those performance-based classes like music or drama or art or phys ed. Using Jamboard, so you might create choice boards through that, or vote using sticky notes. You might use Calendar and use the agenda view for time management. And maybe you are thinking about how to manage that personal time and school time, something that's really important in this moment when they are learning at home. So how do we ensure that our students are taking the break? And of course, how do we ensure that educators are taking the break as well, and finding that balance? So just a reminder again that resource hub and all of those documents are going to be available to you afterwards. These are dynamic sites here, and so the purpose is to be a resource for you to walk away with and continue to build on and add on to. What we want to do now, though, is come back to our user personas and think about the spectrum of educators that we are working with. And we want to consider how we might share the ideas we've just come up with in a meaningful way. So leveraging the G Suite tools to create exceptional learning experiences may require scaffolding based on teachers' expertise and readiness. So to help support you in this, we have created a resource. I'm going to let Quinn talk to you about it now.
Thanks, Diane. I was just thinking about, as I was listening there, of, a lot of the times we think back to when we were either students or our students said this, that they said, when am I ever going to use this? I think that's a really interesting phrase to think about too, because I can think back to some trainings that I did when I was with my school district where teachers probably had the same attitude of when am I ever going to use this particular tool or that particular tool. And with the situation right now, it's definitely coming to reality when to use that. And also one of the challenges that always comes to mind when thinking about being a Google trainer and training others is meeting the diverse needs of those that attend our trainings. So if you think back to, the graph of our laggards, our mushy middle, and our early adopters, sometimes they're all in the same room. So really, how do you meet the needs and differentiate the experience for each of them so they're going to leave with something that is valuable? Always a challenge. So as we asked ourselves that question at Future Design School of what can we give trainers to help support meeting the different needs and honoring the educators they work with, honor where they're at, we came up with the G Suite Scenario Challenge Cards. And we'll tell you how to access your copy of these cards in just a moment, but I want to give you a little bit of detail on them. By nature, on their design, we differentiated them, and that's really to meet the varying needs of our users. In this case, all of the educators that you're working with and supporting. And so we have the green cards, the blue cards, and the red cards. The green cards represent the simplest tasks, and the blue ones represent intermediate tasks. And then finally, the red ones are the most challenging. So there are many different ways to use these cards with educators when you get your copy. I'll share a couple of ideas of how we've used them successfully with other groups and teachers. The first way is to use them as a formative assessment at the beginning of a training. And that really helps you to better understand where your participants need more support or even less support and how you can shift the focus. So that's been really helpful. We've also used cards at the end of a training and really used them as a challenge to push their G Suite skills to the next level, saying, okay, we covered this today. You can push yourself by attempting this one on your own. And that's great, especially if you're following up with that particular group. And then next we like to create a beginner, intermediate, and advanced email lists, and then email just one challenge to those particular groups each day. So depending on how you're set up, that might be a more effective way to manage. And of course, you could use Google Groups in the background of that to set up your groups of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So you just had one email address to send it out to. And then my favorite way to use these cards right now is to create a G Suite training Google Classroom. And then I post daily challenges in there. Sometimes it's not every day. Just depends on the group that I'm working with and what their schedule is like. But one of the reasons why I love to set up the Google Classroom is because it's a great way for me to easily track my training to enter into the EduActivity app. So it's a good central resource for me to keep track of what I've done and what trainings I've done. So let's take a closer look at the cards themselves. So you'll see on the front of the card, there's an actual scenario. And the idea behind the scenario is to connect that tool with an actual situation an educator might encounter or might be experiencing. And we want the educator or the person you're training to really challenge themselves to think about the ways that they can address the scenario with the tools that they're familiar with. Right. So, and then they could use that help link at the very bottom if they wanted to get that nudge to think about ways they can address this particular scenario. And then once they've thought about that, they can flip the card over. And on the back, you're going to see there are specific tasks that will show them how the related tools, which are illustrated in the top right, can address that scenario. And now you'll probably find as you look through these cards, there might be more than one way to address that scenario. That's perfectly fine. I think that's a good learning opportunity, a point of discussion if somebody comes to a different conclusion that you're working with, and then talk about how they can both address the situation and what might be best for them. And you'll notice that these tasks aren't really specific in saying, click here, then click here, then click here, right? We still want to challenge those people participating in our training to think about the steps they need to take, and that will help them become more proficient in using in their G Suite skills. So when you get a copy, and we'll show you how to access those here in just a second, when you get a copy of the challenge cards, feel free to customize them to meet the needs of those that you're working with. So if you need to update the language on the scenario to make it more authentic and real based on the situation that some of the educators are having or the people you're working with are experiencing, feel free to do so. If you want to change a red card to a blue card because you feel like that's where it fits better, you're more than welcome to do that. And we'll also show you a way to submit your own cards to us, and we'll update the master deck and you'll be able to go get a fresh copy of that. So collectively as a community, we can continue to build on all that. So before moving on to questions, and we're running out of time, we want to recap and recognize all of the work that you've done in the past hour. So you collaborated in groups to brainstorm the elements that create exceptional remote learning, and feel free to refer back to the work as you're preparing for upcoming trainings. And then you explored problem-driven learning, where the questions that are based in those authentic issues and challenges, as well as digging into student choice and voice, where the students can bring in their personal interest and really choose how they show mastery. You also explored the different types of users and educators that we work with and how it's important to consider their needs when engaging with training, and that's where the challenge cards come in. And then finally, you did some brainstorming on how we might leverage G Suite tools to drive exceptional remote learning experiences that are problem-driven and that are also give our students choice and voice. So you've done a lot of great work today. You should be proud of the work that you've done. I'm looking forward to the next session.